Today we are talking about Taylor Swift. No, she's not on the episode this time, but we are talking about her impact on music and popular culture on today's PMEA's Take Note podcast. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this edition of PMEA's Take Note podcast. I am Mark Despotakis, and I think it's going to be an interesting, fun topic for us today. The main part of our discussion is going to be about Taylor Swift. So we're going for a whole new audience on the podcast today, talking about Taylor Swift. But I'm delighted today to be joined by Dr. Adam Gustafson, who is an associate teaching professor of music at Penn State Harrisburg. Did I get that right?
You did, yeah. Nice to
All right. Adam, thanks for being with us. So we'll get to the Taylor Swift part here in a couple of minutes. But first, I'd like to just tell us about yourself, kind of do the introduction, who you are, how you got to where you are teaching at Penn State Harrisburg.
Sure, yeah. Thanks for having me. My background, I suppose, is maybe a little unique in that I didn't have a ton of music experience sort of in my primary school years. I was a huge consumer of music. My father was a big fan of classic rock and, had a really big record collection that I remember kind of going through. But as far as being a practicing musician, that didn't start for me until college. And honestly, I was walking by a choir rehearsal one day and heard it and went, that is the prettiest thing I've ever heard, and asked what was going on and jumped in. And it's been a musical love story ever since. So during grad school, I studied composition for a couple of years for my master's degree. And then it was at the end of that I really started finding that I was asking questions more about music consumption and how music relates to our social identities and how we perceive ourselves. So I decided to go into a PhD program that allowed me to study that side of music. And that led to a position at Penn State Harrisburg.
Awesome. Very, very interesting. We all have these crazy career paths that get us where we are. We never thought we would do what we ended up doing when we were a kid, I guess. So, all right. So you have done some work and some teaching around Taylor Swift. And so that's going to be the bulk of our discussion today. So first of all, tell us about what kind of courses are you teaching that has led you to have these discussions about Taylor Swift in class?
Sure. Yeah, I'm lucky. I get to teach all the fun courses. And so I mostly teach courses on popular music history, or I teach some humanities courses that I'm allowed to align with music. And so, for example, one of the courses I'm teaching this semester is about the human experience. So, and specifically how the arts kind of play into what the human experience is. And so folks like Taylor Swift, I think, play into that a great deal, given how popular she is today and how many folks see her as the artist of the moment.
Right. Well, so then let's talk about that. What is this draw to Taylor? I mean, she is absolutely inescapable, not only in pop culture, music culture, sports now, politics now. What is this? What's the draw to her?
Yeah, she's indicative, I think, of sort of the sort of Gen Z kind of understanding of music, but also of culture in general. There seems to be this this new notion, I think, back to when I was sort of a younger music consumer, and my generation, somebody who made a lot of money doing what they did was always kind of looked down upon, almost as selling out, or being somebody who had to sell their soul in order to get to where they were. This generation seems to really be okay with the concept that one can be both super successful and wealthy and still authentic. And I think artists like Taylor Swift have done an excellent job of sustaining that sense of authenticity, while also benefiting from the fact that we don't have this kind of disparaging notion of somebody who's actually successful at what they do.
So, that authenticity piece. That really is an interesting observation, actually, because I've kind of thought the same thing too. And so you don't see students, let's take students out of it. You don't see this generation saying, okay, look at all this money she has, look at all this, that she can do anything that she wants, basically. And there have been I've seen, people maybe the Taylor Swift haters are out there who say, "Oh, look what she's doing to the environment with her private jet," and those things like that. But you're seeing generally on the whole that this generation is like, we're okay with that because she is still a real person besides all of that luxury lifestyle she leads.
Yeah, I think so. I think that there again is this notion that she really is sort of living her life in the public lens in a way that is way more intense, I think, than it ever has been, and that's just a result of the amount of technology that we have floating around. And she's managed to do that in a way that we don't feel like we're kind of glimpsing the character Taylor Swift. We feel like we're seeing her actually living her life. And she has done some fairly altruistic things over the years as well, which I think kind of lend to this idea that, yeah, there are these sort of negative aspects to her career, but it seems like she's genuinely interested in trying to remedy those, at least when they come up.
So, do you think that there's a staying power then with her? Because I would imagine there are probably other artists and celebrities that we could say fall into a similar, they have all the money and they do all the amazing stuff, with their money, but they've also done those altruistic things. But maybe they've, I don't want to say fallen from grace, but have kind of fallen out of popular culture. Do you think that there is staying power with her?
I mean, there seems to be. She certainly kind of spans two different generations as kind of the voice of both millennials and Gen Z, if we're using those designations. And what I think I find most interesting about her is that she'll hop genres, right? Like she starts as a country singer and then goes into sort of high pop music and then has a folk phase. She really jumps around, right? And it's not something that happens a lot for other artists, at least ones who exhibit staying power. And that suggests to me that maybe there's more going on with this fixation about her and her life than just the music. And I think that connection will give her more staying power than traditional pop artists have had.
Yeah. Okay. That's a really interesting observation. So then I'm wondering if you're hearing from students who say, okay, yeah, like she has now introduced me to a genre of music that perhaps I would not have been interested in, but because I like this one genre that she has been in, and now I go and research about her elsewhere, and I'm like, oh, I do like the country aspect of what she's doing. Are you seeing students have that reaction?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think also that today's student body and anybody sort of under the age of 30 understands musically fundamentally different, both in terms of how they're consuming it, where they're finding it. In general, especially across the sort of popular genres, there's a real eclecticism there that really I don't know that existed quite as emphatically during my generation, at least, than it does today. And so again, I feel like the idea of genre is something that is much less an aspect of identity compared to earlier generations.
So let's talk about her culturally then. For the past, I don't know how many years, but certainly the past 2 years, I would say, like, she's inescapable.
Mm-hmm.
And there are lots of critics, as she started to show up at football games. The critics were that the broadcasters were showing too much Taylor Swift. And if you go back to those first few broadcasts, there were people, and there are probably people still doing it, but there were people who were saying, well, she was on this for this many minutes during the broadcast, and that's ridiculous. And so now, as we also look at it politically here in the past few months, there was all of this discussion about, will she endorse? Why is it taking her so long to endorse? Both sides coming at that. And then, you've seen, before she endorsed, Donald Trump would put out this fake, these fake AI images related to her. So, I mean, she's in everything. So I'm wondering then, take the music part out of it, looking at the cultural part of it, what are students saying about that in her role in culture? Because especially in these politically charged times, she's taken a political side and she has this political bend, and she has in the past. What are students saying about her role just in culture and politics?
Sure. Yeah. When you sort of read through her statement when she initially put it out, she does a really, I think, interesting thing in that while she does give an endorsement, she also goes out of her way almost to suggest that like the responsibility is still on the person who's going to be doing the voting to figure out who they want, right? And so she leaves the door open for folks who may not agree with who she's endorsing, but still feel like they have access to her. I know I was reading, I think it was in the New York Times, maybe yesterday or the day before, the idea of Republican Swifties on TikTok who are, sort of trying to walk this line between their fandom, but also their political affiliations. Like, it doesn't seem to be as problematic in the sense that maybe it was in the past, where if you aligned yourself with one side, you were automatically kind of associated as only being on that side of things. She really did a good job, I think, of kind of skirting that sort of pigeonholing on one side or the other by putting the ownership back into her fans' hands, right? By saying, hey, go do your own research, go do your own thing. This just happens to be what I'm doing. So again, I think there's a feeling of real authenticity there, right? She's not trying to just bias you. She's not an act of propaganda. She's somebody who came to this conclusion, but has also offered a template for others who might come to a different conclusion.
Do you find any students who are just like, okay, I don't like her. I'm not into her, and I'm tired of her being everywhere. Is there some that have that negative reaction?
So, oh yeah, certainly. Yeah, there certainly seems to be a reaction just in terms of oversaturation, like how much more of this person can we see, can we look at, and there also seems to still be a little bit of a genre kind of distinction there. There does seem to break down sometimes this sort of notion of like folks who are part of the Beyonce crowd don't always mesh with folks who are part of the Taylor Swift crowd. And so some of the traditional barriers still kind of stand up based on genre or where people are positioned.
Okay, that's interesting. That's an interesting observation. So as you've studied, Taylor, you've studied the movement, you've talked to all of these students who have, I'm sure, varied opinions, and some that are like, I know that like there are people who like follow every move of her, that watch every concert on TikTok, and well, she did this, she moved this way tonight, and she didn't move this way last night. I mean, and they look for these like signals in it. So you have those people, and you have the people who don't care. I'm curious. Is there some lesson that we can all take from Taylor Swift? Is she, is there something we can learn just from what she has been able to do, to have this, create what she's done, have this staying power? Are there any lessons?
Yeah, well, I think for me, as you were kind of describing the issue, my thought was all the folks commenting on TikTok and all the folks who are kind of, watching and dissecting every move she makes, whether they agree with her or not, they're still benefiting from her presence, right? The idea of, sort of clicks amounting to one's success in the online space. It doesn't matter if you're critiquing or not, the click is still the click. And so, the thing that I kind of often talk about with Taylor Swift is this notion of not understanding her only as a musician, right? But understanding her as kind of the figurehead of a corporation, or at least the figurehead of an economic ecosystem, right? And within that, even those people who disagree with her stand to benefit from her success, because that's what's driving people to click on those specific videos about either critiques or endorsements of what she's doing.
All right. So before I move this into talking about how this impacts music education, I can't not ask this question. Do you think that it's going to work with her and Travis? Is this the long term?
Hey, you never know, right? But it seems to be going pretty well so far. And I think both of those people are people who have figured out how to navigate their sort of social lives and how to live in that social sphere in a way that is, it seems to be at least a lot healthier than maybe the folks who had to figure it out on the fly. Like we are talking about people now who are a couple generations removed from social media actually popping into the world, and they seem to have a better understanding of it. So, I mean, who knows where it goes, but I think they both are very keenly aware that everyone's watching to see which direction that's going to go.
Yeah, and so my understanding is, some of her previous relationships were not in the open, and the way they became in the open was she would write a song about them after the fact. So I'm kind of then taking off of your point there that maybe that like she's learned from that as well, that now she's in this different space and has to treat it differently.
Yeah, I think, there are a few artists, I think, who kind of span the rise of social media and the influence of social media as the cultural barometer, more than Taylor Swift, right? And so she definitely has learned some lessons. Again, you can see her morphing over the years through various avenues of popular music, but also through various avenues of just media attention. And the way that she acts now is very different than early Taylor Swift, who seemed concerned almost with public perception, and was sort of almost letting it guide her, rather than now where she seems to be the one controlling her own narrative.
So as we look at the impacts of Taylor on music education, I think every genre of music influences those who are teaching it and those who are learning about it. Everyone has their favorite bands, favorite artists. From probably those teenage years. That was kind of usually when you get the hook. So I'm wondering if you've seen any ways that she has impacted music education, if you've thought about ways that she potentially could continue to impact music education, because she is the star of the moment for more than one generation of teenagers, for probably, I would say, like 10 to 15 years right now of teenagers.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about her staying power as though she hasn't been staying now for basically the entirety of the 21st century. It's interesting. I have twin 10-year-old daughters who are just getting to the age where they're starting to be able to participate in school programs for making music, and they both are taking up string instruments, and they're learning their instruments and whatnot. But it's interesting that when they kind of have to go through there. You learn your scale and learn this, that, and the other. But when they're just like free to learn, what they're doing is going onto YouTube and essentially learning Taylor Swift songs, right? They're learning how, one of my daughters plays cello, one plays double bass, and they're both sitting on YouTube for half of an afternoon learning. It's not necessarily learning the nuts and bolts of music, but they're accessing and actually using the skills they're learning by sort of playing along with things that are happening online. So I think it might be sort of a new realm of education, or at least a new way of seeing this developing technology. But I think definitely she gives an interest and an accessibility. It's always nice when you're learning to play an instrument that you have music that you're into, and something that you can access. And I think her music does that. It just provides that extra level of interest, at least in my household.
It's what I found kind of interesting in that area is, people listen to the podcast know that I'm a big marching band person. I have, you tend to see like the pop culture music takes a while before it enters the marching band realm. Well, not with her. I mean, I've seen her accelerate more into that realm so much more. And so it's fascinating when, just this past weekend, actually, it was at a marching band show with the band that I work with. And one of the bands on the field plays a Taylor Swift song. I didn't know this, but like our students went crazy because there's this marching band playing. I was like, what? Tell me what'd you go crazy for? And there it was. So, I think she's already transcending in ways that we hadn't realized.
Yeah. Well, and that's that kind of, I suppose, might move us into a different sphere in the sense of like, we have also moved into an age where, if you look at sort of online music vendors and the music publishing market, and the ability for, folks who wouldn't traditionally be part of a publishing house per se, now have the ability to, almost in real time, upload arrangements of tunes that, otherwise would have taken much longer to kind of get out to market. I think you might be seeing the convergence of both the shifts in the publishing world, as well as this sort of massive popularity of this particular artist.
Well, Adam, this has been a fascinating little bit of a dive into Taylor Swift, and I would presume that she will listen to this. I would guess she would, and I'll put out there again that the invitation is still there for her to come and be on this podcast. I really think this would be the one that could help launch her career.
I think so. Yeah, most definitely. And if she does listen, my daughters would like tickets. So just know that, Taylor.
Well, I think that's all. She's going to be on the podcast. You're going to get the tickets. I think we're
life is good, right?
Yeah. Well, Dr. Adam Gustafson, thank you so much for joining us. You're an associate teaching professor of music at Penn State Harrisburg. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me. This was fun.
And thank you all for joining us on this edition of PMEA's Take Note podcast. We want to thank our sponsors, the Grove City College Department of Music and Zezwitz Music. We will see you next time.